Hello everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today. So a woman went to her doctor. The doctor, after an examination, sighed and said, "I have some bad news. You have cancer, and you'd best put your affairs in order." The woman was shocked, but managed to compose herself and walk into the waiting room where her daughter was waiting. "Well, daughter, we women celebrate when things are good, and we celebrate when things don't go so well. In this case, things aren't well. I have cancer. Let's head to the club and have a martini." After 3 or 4 martinis, the two were feeling a little less somber. There were some laughs and more martinis. They were eventually approached by some of the woman's old friends who were curious as to what the two were celebrating. The woman told her friends they were drinking to her impending end. "I've been diagnosed with AIDS," she told them. The friends were aghast and gave the woman their condolences. After the friends left, the woman's daughter leaned over and whispered, "Mom, I thought you said you were dying of cancer, and you just told your friends you were dying of AIDS." The woman replied, "I don't want any of those dirty women sleeping with your father after I'm gone." So last weekend I saw something at Larry's pistol and pawn shop that sparked my interest. The occasion was our 15th anniversary, and I was looking for a little something extra for my wife, Julie. What I came across was a 10,000-volt pocket purse-sized taser. The effects of the taser were supposed to be short-lived, with no long-term adverse effect on your assailant, allowing her adequate time to retreat to safety. Way too cool. Long story short, I bought the device and brought it home. I loaded 2 AA batteries in the darn thing and pushed the button. Nothing. I was disappointed. I learned, however, that if I pushed the button and pressed it against a metal surface at the same time, I'd get the blue arc of electricity darting back and forth between the prongs. Unfortunately, I have yet to explain to Julie what that burn spot is on the face of her microwave. Okay, so I was home alone with this new toy, thinking to myself that it couldn't be all that bad with only 2 AAA batteries, right? There I sat in my recliner, my cat Gracie looking on intently while I was reading the directions and thinking that I really needed to try this thing out on a flesh and blood moving target. I must admit, I thought about zapping Gracie for a fraction of a second and thought better of it. She is such a sweet cat. But if I was going to give this thing to my wife to protect herself against a mugger, I did want some assurance that it would work as advertised. Am I wrong? So, there I sat in a pair of shorts and a tank top with my reading glasses perched delicately on the bridge of my nose, directions in one hand and taser in another. The directions said that a 1-second burst would shock and disorient your assailant. A 2-second burst was supposed to cause muscle spasms and a major loss of bodily control. A 3-second burst would purportedly make your assailant flop on the ground like a fish out of water. Any burst longer than 3 seconds would be wasting the batteries. All the while I'm looking at this little device, measuring about 5 inches long, less than half an inch in circumference. Pretty cute, really, and thinking to myself, no possible way. What happened next is almost beyond description, but I'll do my best. I'm sitting there alone, my cat looking on with her head cocked to one side as to say, "Don't do it, dipshit." Reasoning that a 1-second burst from such a tiny little old thing couldn't hurt all that bad, I decided to give myself a 1-second burst just for heck of it. I touched the prongs to my naked thigh, pushed the button, and, holy mother of God, weapons of mass destruction. What the hell? I'm pretty sure Jesse Ventura ran in through the side door, picked me up in the recliner, Then body slammed us both on the carpet, over and over and over again. I vaguely recall waking up on my side in the fetal position, with tears in my eyes, body soaking wet, both nipples on fire, testicles nowhere to be found, with my left arm tucked under my body in the oddest position, and tinkling in my legs. The cat was making meowing sounds I had never heard before, clinging to a picture frame hanging above the fireplace, obviously in an attempt to avoid getting slammed by my body flopping all over the living room. Note, if you ever feel compelled to mug yourself with a taser, one note of caution. There is no such thing as a 1-second burst when you zap yourself. You will not let go of that thing until it is dislodged from your hand by a violent thrashing about on the floor. A 3-second burst would be considered conservative. That hurt like hell. A minute or so later, I can't be sure, as time was a relative thing at that point. I collected my wits, what little I had left, sat up, and surveyed the landscape. My bent reading glasses were on the mantel of the fireplace. The recliner was upside down, and about 8 feet or so from where it originally was. My triceps, right thigh, and both nipples were still twitching. My face felt like it had been shot up with Novocaine, and my bottom lip weighed 88 pounds. I had no control over the drooling. Apparently, I crapped myself, but was too numb to know for sure, and my sense of smell was gone. I saw a faint smoke cloud above my head, which I believe came from my hair. I'm still looking for my nuts, and I'm offering a significant reward for their safe return. By the way, my wife loved the gift, and now regularly threatens me with it. If you think education is difficult, try being stupid. So, it was a practical session in the psychology class. The professor showed a large cage with a male rat in it. The rat was in the middle of the cage. Then, the professor put a piece of cake on one side and put a female rat on the other side. The male rat ran towards the cake and ate it. Then, the professor changed the cake and replaced it with some bread. The male rat again ran towards the bread. This experiment went on with the professor changing the food every time. And every time, the male rat ran towards the food item and never towards the female rat. Professor asked the students, "This experiment shows that food is the greatest strength and attraction. Do you agree?" Then, one of the students from the back rows said, "Sir, why don't you change the female rat? This one might be his wife." The professor stood straight up, his finger pointing towards the student, and said, "You just got an A." So a beautiful fairy appeared one day to an asylum seeker right outside the immigration offices in Australia. "My good man," the fairy said, "I've been told to grant you 3 wishes, since you've just arrived in Sydney, Australia, with your wife and 7 children." The man told the fairy, "Well, in Somalia, where I come from, we don't have good teeth, so I want new teeth. Maybe a lot of gold in them." The fairy looked at the man's almost toothless grin, and poof, he had a brand new, shining set of gold teeth in his mouth. "What else?" asked the fairy. 2 more wishes to go. The claimant now got bolder. "I need a big house with a 3-car garage on the North Shore with 8 bedrooms for my family and the rest of my refugee relatives who still live in my country. I want to bring them all over here." With a quick poof, in the distance, there could be seen a beautiful mansion with a 3-car garage, a long driveway, a walkout patio with a BBQ and a sparkling in-ground pool and a Hummer, full of his nephews playing their music. "One more wish left for you," said the fairy, waving her wand. "I want to be Australian with Australian clothes, instead of rags, an Aussie accent, and a baseball cap instead of this shawl, and I want to have white skin like the Australians." Poof, and the man was transformed, wearing worn-out jeans from Best for Less, a dirty Kmart t-shirt, and a greasy Billabong baseball cap. He had his bad teeth back and the mansion had disappeared from the horizon. "What the bloody hell's happened to my new teeth?" he screamed. "Where's my new bloody house? Where's my Centrelink gold card?" The fairy said, "Tough luck. Now that you're an Australian, you're entitled to nothing." And she disappeared. So my wife and I were sitting at a table at my high school reunion, and I kept staring at a drunken lady swigging her drink as she sat alone at a nearby table. My wife asked, "Do you know her?" "Yes," I sighed. "She's my old girlfriend. I understand she took to drinking right after we split up those many years ago, and I hear she hasn't been sober since." "My God," says my wife. "Who would think a person could go on celebrating that long?" So a lawyer purchased a box of very rare and expensive cigars, then insured them against, among other things, fire. Within a month, having smoked his entire stockpile of these great cigars, and without yet having made even his first premium payment on the policy, the lawyer filed a claim against the insurance company. In his claim, the lawyer stated the 24 cigars were lost in a series of small fires. The insurance company refused to pay, citing the obvious reason that the man had consumed the cigars in the normal fashion. The lawyer sued them and won. Delivering the ruling, the judge agreed with the insurance company that the claim was frivolous. The judge stated, nevertheless, that the lawyer held a policy from the company, which it had warranted that the cigars were insurable and also guaranteed that it would insure them against fire, without defining what is considered to be unacceptable fire, and was obligated to pay the claim. Rather than endure a lengthy and costly appeal process, the insurance company accepted the ruling and paid $15,000 to the lawyer for his loss of the cigars lost in the fires. Now, for the best part. After the lawyer cashed the check, the insurance company had him arrested on 24 counts of arson. With his own insurance claim and testimony from the previous case being used against him, the lawyer was convicted of intentionally burning his insured property and was sentenced to 24 months in jail and a $24,000 fine. So a mother-in-law decides to test her 3 son-in-laws for their good nature. For this, she goes for a walk by a river with the first son-in-law and jumps in. He saves her. Next morning, he finds a Toyota Corolla parked outside his house with note, "From your mother-in-law." Next, she goes for a walk by the river with the second son-in-law and jumps in. He too saves her. Next morning, he also finds a Toyota Corolla parked outside his house with note, "From your mother-in-law." Next, she goes for a walk by a river with the third son-in-law and jumps in. He just laughs and walks away. Next morning, he finds a brand new BMW parked outside his house with a note saying, "From your father-in-law." So I was in a long line at 7:45 a.m. today at the grocery store that opened at 8 for seniors only. A young man came from the parking lot and tried to cut in at the front of the line, but an old lady beat him back into the parking lot with her cane. He returned and tried to cut in again, but an old man punched him in the gut, then kicked him to the ground and rolled him away. As he approached the line for the 3rd time, he said, "If you don't let me unlock the door, you'll never get in there." So when a group of tourists visited a crocodile farm, the owner of the place launched a bold proposal. Whoever dares to jump, swim to the coast and survive, I'll give you $1 million. No one dared to move. Suddenly, a man jumped into the water and desperately swam to the shore while being chased by all the crocodiles. With enormous luck, he climbed out of the pond, taking everyone's admiration at the scene. Then the owner announced, "We have a brave winner." After collecting his reward, the couple returned to the hotel. Upon arrival, the manager told him he was very brave to jump. Then the man said, "I didn't jump. Someone pushed me." His wife smiled behind him. The moral of the story is that behind every successful man, there's a woman who pushes him. So unexpectedly, an artist's girlfriend started insisting on sleeping with him every day. Though quite unusual, he didn't question his luck, deciding to just enjoy the ride. One day, his girlfriend approached him saying, "Honey, can you sketch a picture for me?" "Of course," he replied. "What should I draw? What do you think our baby will look like?" He stared back at her, eyes wide. Then, sighing heavily, he grabbed a pencil and pad, quickly sketched out a picture, and pushed it toward her. "What the hell is this?" She laughed, surveying the page. It was just a stick figure, firing a gun at another stick figure, smiling with no wounds showing on his stick body. "I asked you to imagine what our baby would look like," she repeated. "And I got a vasectomy 5 years ago," he said, so I drew a blank. So the 7 dwarves go to the Vatican, and because they are the 7 dwarves, they are immediately ushered in to see the Pope. Grumpy leads the pack. "Grumpy, my son," says the Pope, "what can I do for you?" Grumpy asks, "Excuse me, Your Excellency, but are there any dwarf nuns in the Vatican?" The Pope wrinkles his brow at the odd question, thinks for a moment, and answers, "No, Grumpy, there are no dwarf nuns in the Vatican." In the background, a few of the dwarves start giggling. Grumpy turns around and glares, silencing them. Grumpy turns back. "Your worship, are there any dwarf nuns in all of Rome?" The Pope, puzzled now, again thinks for a moment and then answers, "No, Grumpy, there are no dwarf nuns in all of Rome." This time, all of the other dwarves burst into laughter. Once again, Grumpy turns around and silences them with an angry glare. Grumpy turns back and says, "Mr. Pope, are there any dwarf nuns anywhere in the world?" The Pope, really confused by the question, says, "I'm sorry, my son, there are no dwarf nuns anywhere in the world." The other dwarves collapse into a heap, rolling and laughing, pounding the floor, tears rolling down their cheeks as they begin chanting, "Grumpy shagged a penguin. Grumpy shagged a penguin." So I got a strange text last night off a number I didn't know. I replied, "Who's this?" I got a message back saying, "Your worst nightmare," which left me a bit baffled as she was sitting next to me and hadn't moved the whole time. So I went to the horse racing event for the first time ever. I didn't have a clue about betting, so I walked up to the counter and said, "Excuse me, could you explain to me what an each-way bet is, please?" The man said, "No problem, sir. An each-way bet is split into 2 stakes. The first is a bet on the horse to win. The second is a proportional bet on the horse to finish in a place. This can be first, second, third, or even fourth, depending on the amount of horses running in the race." I said, "That sounds perfect for me. Can I have $2 each way on number 4, please?" "No," he replied. "Oh," I said, "and why's that?" He replied, "Because this is a hot dog stand." So every morning, the CEO of a large bank in Manhattan walks to the corner for a shoe shine. He sits in an armchair, examines the Wall Street Journal, and the shoe shiner buffs his shoes to a mirror shine. One morning, the shoe shiner asks the CEO, "What do you think about the situation in the stock market?" The man answered arrogantly, "Why are you so interested in that topic?" The shoe guy replies, "I have millions in your bank," he says, "and I'm considering investing some of the money in the capital market." "What's your name?" asked the executive. "John Smith," was the reply. The CEO arrives at the bank and asks the manager of the customer department, "Do we have a client named John Smith?" "Certainly," answers the customer service manager. "He is a high net worth customer with $12.6 million in his account." The executive comes out, approaches the shoe shiner, and says, "Mr. Smith, I would like to invite you next Monday to be the guest of honor at our board meeting and tell us the story of your life. I am sure we could learn something from your life's experience." At the board meeting, the CEO introduces him to the board members. "We all know Mr. Smith from the corner shoe shine stand, but Mr. Smith is also an esteemed customer. I invited him here to tell us the story of his life. I am sure we can learn from him." Mr. Smith began his story. "I came to this country 50 years ago as a young immigrant from Europe with an unpronounceable name. I got off the ship without a penny. The first thing I did was change my name to Smith. I was hungry and exhausted. I started wandering around looking for a job, but to no avail. Fortunately, I found a coin on the sidewalk. I bought an apple. I had two options: eat the apple and quench my hunger, or start a business. I sold the apple for 25 cents and bought 2 apples with the money. I also sold them and continued in business. When I started accumulating a few dollars, I was able to buy a set of used brushes and shoe polish and started polishing shoes. I didn't spend a penny on entertainment or clothing. I just bought bread and some cheese to survive. I saved penny by penny, and after a while, I bought a new set of shoe brushes and polishes in different shades and expanded my clientele. I lived like a monk and saved penny by penny. After a while, I was able to buy an armchair so my clients could sit comfortably while I shined their shoes, and that brought me more clients. I did not spend a penny on the joys of life. I kept saving every cent. A few years ago, when the previous shoe shiner on the corner decided to retire, I had already saved enough money to buy his shoe shine location at this great place. Finally, 6 months ago, my sister, who was a streetwalker in Chicago, passed away and left me $12.6 million. So Pete went over to his friend Tony's house and was amazed at how well Tony treated his wife. He often told her how attractive she was, complimented her on her cooking, and showered her with hugs and kisses. "Gee," Pete remarked later, "you really make a big fuss over your wife." "I started to appreciate her more about 6 months ago," Tony said. "It has revived our marriage, and we couldn't be happier." Inspired, Pete hurried home, hugged his wife, and told her how much he loved her and said he wanted to hear all about her day. But she burst into tears. "Honey," Pete said, "what's the matter?" "This has been the worst day," she replied. "This morning, our son fell off his bike and broke his ankle. Then the washing machine broke. Now, to top it off, you come home drunk." So a while ago, a new supermarket opened on the coast. It has an automatic water mister to keep the produce fresh. Just before it goes on, you hear the sound of distant thunder and the smell of fresh rain. When you pass the milk cases, you hear cows mooing, and there is the scent of freshly mowed hay. In the meat department, there is the aroma of charcoal grilled steaks with onions. When you approach the egg case, you hear hens clucking and cackling, and the air is filled with the pleasing aroma of bacon and eggs frying. The bread department features the tantalizing smell of fresh-baked bread and cookies. I don't buy toilet paper there anymore. So I whispered to my wife late one night, "If I died, would you get married again?" "I suppose so," she replied. "Would you sleep in the same bed with him?" I asked. She replied, "Well, it's the only bed in the house, so I have no choice." So I asked, "Would you make love to him?" "Honey," she said patiently, "he would be my husband." So I asked her, "Would you give him my car?" "No," she yawned. "He can't even drive." So 4 guys enjoyed playing golf, but John had trouble seeing the ball. His friends convinced him that he needed glasses. When John finally bought a pair, his game immediately improved. Back in the clubhouse, after a few beers, one of his friends said, "John, those glasses really helped your game." John answered, "Yeah, the ball looks like a basketball now. I just can't miss it." After a few more, he left for the toilet, but came back with the front of his jeans all wet. "Geez, John, what happened?" John said, "Don't know. I pulled it out, and it looked too big for mine, so I just put it back." So 2 Irish farmers are walking down a road towards the pub after a long day's work when they hear a motorcycle behind them. They are totally shocked to find that when the bike passes them, the biker is headless. The 2 men look at each other and shrug. They continue down the road because the call of the pub is getting stronger. As they go, a cyclist comes up behind them, and on passing them, he too is seen to be headless. The 2 old men shake their heads and continue to walk down the road. After a few minutes, Mick, who's walking along the inside, turns to his companion and says, "You know what, Seamus, I be thinking that maybe you should be carrying that scythe on your other shoulder." So a woman walked into the kitchen to find her husband stalking around with a fly swatter. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Hunting flies," he replied. "Oh, killed any?" she said. "Yup, 3 males, 2 females," came the answer. Intrigued, the wife asked, "How can you tell them apart?" The husband said, 3 were on a beer can, 2 were on the phone.